So appliqué is basically means to apply, and you're sewing little bits of fabric onto a bigger bit, and you can decide how you're going to sew them on. You could do stitches all the way around, you could do one stitch on your items, you could do all different kinds of things, and I'm going to show you how I made this cute little lion. For your appliqué, you will need your patch, your other fabrics that you want to sew on. We've sent you some felt, some leather, and some kind of plain woven fabrics. You can use all of them, use only one style. Got thread, needle. We've also sent you a needle threader, thimble, some pins, scissors, paper to draw your design and your patterns out, and a pencil. When you're thinking about your design, remember, in your square, you need to leave 2 centimetres around the outside. So when you think about your design, have it either something carrying on from the edge or stopping. I am going to do, I want to have a little lion on mine, so it's going to look something like that. If you have it over these 2 centimetres on the side, we might lose a little bit of your design when we sew them together. So try if you can. That's what my design is going to look like. When you have your fabric piece, you could measure your 2 centimetres. Try not to draw it on the fabric, but a good estimate is kind of like an adult thumb, like that. Squish down is about 2 centimetres. Leave that much around the outside. You could take your pieces, you could draw straight on the back of the fabric if you want to. Another option is to use your paper, draw your shape that you want on, cut that out, and pin that onto your fabric before you cut. I think it's better to cut all the bits you want out first and then start sewing them together. I'm going to put this onto here so I can draw out his mane the way that I want it. Have a few more layers around. Okay. Not very scary, but this is my happy little lion. Oh, I might do some fluffy little bits. Okay, so I'm going to think about what layers I want to sew on first. So I'm going to take his face off a second. And if you see here, I've left this big because that's just going to be easier to sew. And I'm going to put these ones on first because I want these to be hidden at the bottom underneath the orange layer. So I'm going to pin it. Where I want those. So, threading your needle, top tip when you're using thread, you never you don't really need the thread any longer than your arm, but we are going to double it over. So if you pull a length of thread off as long as your arm, and then thread your needle, top tip is to hold the thread between your thumb and your finger, to hold a tiny, tiny bit, and then guide the needle down onto it. Pull it so you've got it doubled over. This just makes it stronger and also means your needle won't come unthreaded. And then you tie a knot by going around, make a circle where the tail is, tail's on the top, bring the tail under and through to make a little knot. I try and do 2 of those. Okay, and then we're ready to sew. You can also use a needle threader to thread your needle, which we've sent you, and sent you the instructions on how to do it. So, when you're sewing, you can decide where you're going to sew. So you could sew all the way around the outside of it. You could sew just one side. You can also kind of decide what stitch you're going to do as well. For this, because it's hidden underneath the other layers, I'm just going to do a running stitch along it like this. I've also left this fabric to fray. Felt won't fray, but some of them will fray. I quite like the effect when things fray, but you might not. What you can do, say you were going to have a box and you wanted it to be really neat, you could fold over these edges so the raw edge is encased. Obviously you'd need to start with a shape that was a little bit bigger, and then you could fold those edges in and then sew along it if you were bothered about the fraying. But it doesn't really matter, this is just decorative. It doesn't have to be it's not going to be heavily kind of used or worn, so it's just going into our quilt, so it's not, you don't have to think about too much. Okay, so a basic running stitch, we're going to start with our thread, our needle going in at the back, and I'm going to aim along the bottom. Obviously with this fluff you can't see it, which is quite lucky, not so good for the video, but running stitch is the one that just goes in and out, so you're catching the fabric. In, out. I prefer to do it in kind of one swoop, so I'm kind of going in and out. I would say about 1 centimetre is the biggest you want your stitches. Well, it depends what look you want, you could do bigger stitches if you want, but kind of functionality, say about 1 centimetre is quite a good strong stitch. So you see each of these fabrics, I've not started my thread or stopped it again, I'm just carrying on round. It doesn't look super impressive at this point, but when we add the more layers on, it's going to look quite effective, and it's super simple just to do this. And what you want to avoid as well, don't pull it too tight. Can you see that's crumpling? So when you pull it through, have it tight enough that your stitches aren't going to come undone, but not too tight that you end up with kind of fabric wrinkles. And you can, before you tie your knot, you can straighten anything out that gets wrinkled. Once you reach the end, and top tip is to leave your thread about this long, probably about that long, so you've got enough room to do your knot. Even if you're getting quite close to the end of your shape, don't make the needle, don't sew up until the needle's like, the thread's left on the needle that big, because you won't be able to do your knot. Leave it long enough so you can tie your knot. Take your needle to the back, And then we've got this stitch here. What we're going to do is go through, if you haven't just done a stitch, you can do another little stitch on the back. And then you go through the stitch that you've just done with your needle. So you're not going through the fabric, you're going through the stitch. Like that. We do it again. And before you pull it tight, you take your needle through the loop. Like that. And we do that again. Oh my God, done that bubbly thing. As if it's done that bubbly thing, just do it again. Make sure it's nice and tight. I'm going to go through this stitch. So we go through our stitch. Before you pull it tight, needle through the loop. And do that twice before you pull it tight. And that will be a really secure knot that's close to your fabric. Cut it off. If you had enough thread, you could just tie another knot and carry on sewing, or rethread your needle. Okay, that's my base layer. I'm just gonna put this on top now, and actually I'm not gonna sew this one on because it will get caught when I put the top layer on. And what I can even do is just hide any messy stitching if I've done any. I'm just going to put that on there, and I'm going to pin this one to here because I quite like the way it looks when it flaps. Quite happy with that. Okay, so I've tied another knot, and this time I'm going to do what we'll call an overstitch. So it just doesn't matter where I start. I'm just going to start by this ear here, and then you're going over the shape and back out like that. So you want to try and evenly space it. As you go around. So the needle goes in and back out above the shape, kind of on the outside of the shape, and that's a great way of getting all the way around the shape. And you can adjust how big the stitches are, how far apart they are, whatever you want to do for your design. I've sewn all the way around my lion's face. I turn it onto the back and do my knot, so I'm going to go underneath the stitch that I've just done. Before I pull it tight, needle through the loop. And I'll do that again. Before I pull it tight, needle through the loop. And then you can cut that. So if you've got little shapes, like the ears here, you could just do one stitch through them. So I'm just going to start from the back. I've got my knot in my thread. I'm just going to do a stitch down the middle, and I'm going to do that again just to make sure it's really secure. And even if you've got pieces like this ear here, obviously the other ear is going over there, but it's quite a jump, so come to the back and do your knot again. Get really good at doing knots by the end of it. Cut that off, do another knot in the end, and start again for the other ear. If you have like big jumps between your thread, you can end up, if one of them falls off accidentally, then the whole thing could fall apart. So it's better to get used to doing knots, get really good at your knots, and then you can be safe that, if one thing falls off, not everything's going to fall off. Okay, then I'm going to do another knot. I think my line's looking pretty cute. I'm going to go through where I want my eye. Oh, so if your knot isn't big enough ever, best thing to do is just hold your, so you've done your knot, hold your thread like that and do a little stitch on the spot. So you come in and out and then everything should be stuck. Okay, I'm going to put the eye on here. And the other thing you could do is like a specific stitch. You could do a little cross stitch to get stuff on. So Mr. Lion's going to have little crosses in the middle of his eye. Creepy. Like that. Again, rather than jumping to the other eye, even though it's a bit boring, do another knot before you So here is my little lion finished. You can see different stitches. Remember to leave your 2 centimeters around the outside.